السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أما بعد, I wanted to take some time to return back to the life of Imam Ibn Khaldun from the scholars of al-Andalus. The introduction to the English abridgment by Bruce Lawrence gives a lot of insights into the context or into the life or the time period in which Imam Ibn Khaldun lived. And that affords us, it gives us a lot of benefits as far as understanding who he was and the era that he lived in and how he became the scholar that he became. There are a number of lessons that we gain from this scholar. First of all, Imam Ibn Khaldun rahmatullahi alayhi is said that he is descended from a family that comes from Yemen that settled in al-Andalus. And his full name indicates to his Yemeni roots, Abdurrahman Abu Zayd ibn Muhammad bin Khaldun al-Hadrami. And al-Hadrami links back to al-Hadramaut, or Hadar al-Maut, as they say, which is in Yemen. May Allah alleviate the conditions of the people of Yemen. The unique thing here, and this is mentioned by Bruce, is that Imam Ibn Khaldun is considered to be among the privileged of the society economically. He says other privileged members of an Andalusian society were also Arab immigrants, though many, including Ibn Khaldun's forebears, had intermarried with indigenous Berbers. So one of the lessons that we get here is that as people were migrating into Andalus, there was this intermarriage between the different tribes, which were marked by different cultures but united by Islam. And so Bruce makes the point to say that what distinguished Imam Ibn Khaldun in this case is not his lineage or his connection to the Berbers by way of marriage, but the fact that he lived in the Mediterranean, in Al-Andalus in this case. And so here in this place, there were Jewish, Christian, and Muslim influences. Of course, we know that Al-Andalus was dominated by the Muslims, and the Muslims had created that environment. And that community, that diverse community, had inherited Greek science, basically the sciences, Arabic, poetry. Arabic was the dominant language, and they were connected to Asia by way of trade and history. Right, the Mediterranean Sea has become the nexus of Muslim cosmopolitanism by the 14th century. Social mobility as well as physical travel animated the Muslims in the Mediterranean, especially those like Imam Ibn Khaldun, who rose to high positions or posts in government, law, and education. So the concept of rihla, it becomes important, right? And so we know that this became a model for his autobiography, the whole idea of chronicling the rihla, or the travels that one engages in. And so one of the things that comes to mind is that his situation is very unique because he places himself between the East and the West. Between the East and the West. And so in that case, he becomes a citizen of the world. Imam ibn Khaldun, they show that he was interested in history. And the author doesn't bring out this point, the author of the introduction, because the author is not familiar with the Quran. It's clear. But the Quran imposes on the Muslim psyche when reading and listening the importance of looking at history from a number of different vantage points. One is not only to understand the principles of the rise and fall of civilization, right? Because it's not just an issue of disbelief being connected to failure, so that if a society is full of Iman, then it becomes successful. And if a society is full of kufr, then it is an automatic failure. And Imam ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi takes up that theme in talking about the whole issue of the just society with kufr being able to maintain itself versus the society of Iman and injustice. So justice is a different reality that we come to encounter. And I think a lot of people have this as a missing element in their Islamic education, and that is how it is that Islam looks at society and human relationships in the political, in the economic, in the intermingling, in the dealings that people have with one another, and what that means for community. Most of the time, the focus is on issues of Aqidah and the unseen, and many times not even from the angle of developing the spiritual orientation of the human being, meaning the life of the heart. Most of the times it's just the issue of talking about some fundamental points in Aqidah, and those points become issues of the unseen, and that's about it. And so the knowledge base of the Muslim is very limited in today's time. And so even the concept of worship is limited to the 5 pillars of Islam. And then we know that we don't make Hajj on a regular basis, but it's only enjoined upon us once in a lifetime. And it only comes around once a year as far as the time period for Hajj is concerned. So that's not an act of ibadah which is done continuously on a daily basis. And so we're limited with Salah, and then Ramadan comes around, but Ramadan has a much bigger impact than Hajj on many of us, because Ramadan is something that has to be done every year versus once in a lifetime. And then the issue of zakat, and we know that zakat is something which actually is a pillar which is not being fulfilled, and that we have a lot of people that are not giving their zakat in the ummah. And so the reality of how we understand Islam is in between the issue of Aqidah and Salah, and maybe fasting you add on to that, and that's kind of where a lot of us are at in our understanding what Islam is. We're kind of focused on those things, and sometimes not even to the level that we should be. And so what's left of our understanding of Islam is limited to just those acts of ibadah, and then how Islam relates to the rest of our lives, or to the whole of our lives, is left with a series of question marks, right? Because we're not focusing. So I said all of that to come to the point of noting The Imam Ibn Khaldun rahmatullahi alayhi, he brings out something which is oft forgotten in the Quran, and that is how the Quran talks about history to indicate to us certain realities. The realities that pertain to the rise and fall of civilization, the ebb and flow, the development of culture, solidarity, community, and the whole issue of learning from history how to perfect behavior. And so Imam Ibn Khaldun rahmatullahi alayhi, he took that endeavor quite seriously, right? So I wouldn't say that he has a secondary interest in history as the author is proposing. I would say that Imam Ibn Khaldun has a unique methodology in fiqh in that he is dependent heavily upon the utilization of history to be able to understand not only human behavior in the limited sense of one-on-one relationships, but at the social level and at the societal levels and at the levels of interlocking societies or conflicting societies. And so in order to be able to achieve that understanding, right, of these things, Imam Ibn Khaldun, he looked at the political orientation of a society. He looked at the cultural foundations of a society, the religious foundations, and what people actually do as far as practicing their deen is concerned. Do they really practice or not? Imam Ibn Khaldun wanted to know what are the boundaries of culture. Right? He wanted to know where it is that culture begins and where it ends, and how it is that it impacts human behavior and the mind of human beings. He made some mistakes when it came to the issue of some points about race, because he imitated others in that regard. Maybe he modified, so maybe you can say that he had some beliefs that were somewhat problematic about race. But the fact that the idea of tribe and the idea of cultural community and ethnic community falls under his examination, it means a lot. And so then what we get from Imam Ibn Khaldun is that it's important for the jurist, for the faqih, to look at society, to look at the world around, to see how those things impact trends and behaviors. And so from there we can begin to develop a solid fiqh. And I wanted to end with that point that Imam Ibn Khaldun, not only did he focus on the issue of language and refinement of language, that was very important, especially to the people of Andalus, right? But there's also the issue of being methodological when it comes to researching, whether it's the Quran and the Sunnah, or whether it is the employment of reason, and how it is that we go about understanding human behavior, right? And so the methodology is important when it comes to understanding language, when it comes to understanding Quran and the Sunnah, when it comes to understanding human interactions, when it comes to understanding history, when it comes to understanding society. The ulama in the past, you found that they were very concerned with all of these realities, and these realities informed ultimately how it was that they were to perform or carry out the juridical process or fiqh itself, right? Coming to fiqh. And then there was a different type of education at that time. It says here, by the time Imam Ibn Khaldun, or by the time of Imam Ibn Khaldun, scientific activity had professionalized, so much so that most of the distinguished physicians and astronomers of 12th and 13th century Syria in Cairo were employed as jurists. Teachers in madrasa like medical institutions or timekeepers in the region's major masjids. At first it may seem odd that his treatment of the sciences will be delayed until the 6th and final chapter of the Muqaddimah. It is not because sciences are unimportant or of secondary importance to Muslim elites, but rather it is because sciences are integral to life that they took a role. And the crafts also are necessary. So Imam Ibn Khaldun introduces all of these things as part of the reality of his study. So he looks at the issue of education and its types, how it is that people make money, what kind of societies are the societies which people are settled, society in which people are migrants, going back and forth. What type of society is it? Then after all is said and done, it says more than being a jurist and more than being a person of writing, he was also a teacher. And so we'll end with that. There's more to be said regarding Ibn Khaldun and his methodology, but one of the things that I want to highlight and leaving once again is that it's important to understand that the scholar and the would-be scholar has to focus on understanding the world around him or her, and that should be done in a systematic way. So the study of history, the study of psychology, the study of sociology, study of political science, economics, and just engaging in that type of thinking overall is very helpful to build solid scholarship. And we end with that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.